and recording, so you can pick back up and it makes the same file.
I have to look at stuff like that. I'll bet you there's something that'll work a little better than this. But all right, so let's keep going on sort of these basics. We talked about binary logical operators a little bit, and an or. We've already talked about equality operators in JavaScript. There's different types. There's strict and lenient, or type specific and not type specific. Numbers, as we said, there's no difference in JavaScript, unlike a lot of other languages, between an integer and a floating point number. So 1 equals 1.0. There's not a difference in these numbers types. A special number, not a number is a special number. So that if something like can't be converted to a number when it tries to do a conversion, then what you get back out is not a number, NaN, which counts as a number in some contexts, but is basically telling you it's not a number. Yeah, it's very weird. It's what? Why is not a number a number? I think, in fact, I could be wrong. Type of not a number is number. You couldn't be more confusing than that if you tried. That's just straight up misinformation. Like, that is fake news. Infinity is also a number. So if you do try and perform an action that you're not allowed to do, you can see, 3 divided by 0, you get infinity. It's you also have negative infinity. Probably not going to run into those too often. It's not something I pretty much ever encounter in the code that I'm working with, so it's not a big concern. So we've talked about operators. You guys are already familiar with plus, minus, multiply, divide. Do people remember the modulus or remainder operator and how that works? So if we had, let's see, 13 mod 10. Do you remember what would the result of that be? Can you read that, or do I need to change the color? All right, let's see if I can change it. Is it easier?
Yes.
Okay. There we go. You guys make me suffer with a bright one. All right. Do people remember how that works, the modulus operator? Any confusion on it?
It literally just gives you the remainder.
It gives you the remainder. Always the remainder. You can think of it like a clock, right? Is probably the most common example that you're used to dealing with. So if somebody's giving you 24, time in 24 hours, it's like a hand clock on a clock. It's going to truncate it to sometime within 12 hours instead of 24 or something. And it's going to be whatever remainder based off whatever number that is. And you will use that a lot. That's a very common operation to perform in programming, not something that you do a lot outside of programming. So we also have increment and decrement. I didn't really use this too often in class either, but I already said programmers are lazy, right? And so we had, let's create a number and let's make it 5 to start with. And we just showed that we could do num plus equals 1 to add 1 to it, right? And we could do num plus equals 15 if we wanted to add 15 to it all at one time. But doing the plus equals 1 is such a common operation where you're just adding 1 to something. For example, you're going through a loop and you want to add 1 to the array index every time you go through it, that we're so lazy we don't even want to put spaces and plus equals and all of that stuff. So instead, we were like, what if we just do num plus plus? And now the value of number is getting incremented each time. So num plus plus. And it's gone up. So it's just a very, very lazy way to do that. And there is a slight difference between these two. If you paying close attention, you might notice the difference between them. Because, well, it's not just immediately giving you the result, yeah?
It's adding it first and then returning.
Yes, the difference is it's incrementing it first and then returning the result of that increment. And in the case where you're putting it afterwards, it's returning the result of your current value and then incrementing it.
So is there anything code-wise that would break if you do it before then after? Other than just review?
It could depend on what you're looking for in your value. It might depend on where you're using it.
Okay.
So if you care that you get back the value after being incremented, you might want to use the first or the second syntax, the plus plus syntax. But if you care about getting the value beforehand, but then incrementing it, then you might use the first syntax. So for example, if we wrote a very simple, like, just start at 0, it's like a very simple while loop. And you're gonna see, this is me being, you're starting to see stuff that you probably haven't seen before because I'm doing a whole bunch of shorthand that last class I wrote a lot of this out line by line, bit by bit, so that it was much easier to follow. But you're gonna start running into a ton of this sort of shorthand stuff where people are doing simple things. And so this is something that, I mean, you wouldn't exactly see this, but this is the type of thing that you might encounter. And so what we'll get is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Whereas if we change this just slightly, I think this will give me different results. I could be wrong. I didn't think through this before I wrote it out, so we'll see how this goes. And here we didn't actually see 10. And that's because that last time through this loop, it incremented number and then compared that value 10 being less than 10. And it won't actually enter the loop that time. Whereas last time it compared 9 is less than 10, 9 was less than 10, and it incremented number sort of after that. And then it printed off 10 because it still entered the loop.
So depending on what the end user needs for data, that's how you determine which one you need.
Or what you need, yeah, the way you need it, maybe. The same thing exists for decrement, you know, going down. So let's say you had an array and you wanted to start at the top of it and work your way backwards through the items in the array. You might do something like that. You know, so a very simple example of that was if we have an array. What should we have an array of? What type of stuff should we put in this? Foods? What? Orange, fruits. All right, what else we got?
Strawberry.
Give me a hard one to spell, thanks. Two more.
Blueberries. That was longer.
It is, but I, at least for some reason, I'm going to be able to spell it. I don't know why strawberry for me, I was like, I'm going to spell it wrong.
Banana.
I only know this because of the song. I'm literally thinking it as I type it.
Cherry.
All right. Right. So if we have an array, with the decrement, if we want to start from the back or something, you know, you may do something like var num equals r dot length, and then while let me see here. I want to, and it doesn't really matter when I do this, I don't think. Does it? You get the 0. There may be a bug here, we'll see. Right, and then you can count backwards through your array just by decrementing bit by bit. And I did another little tricky thing there. I'm going to start introducing these, and I wouldn't be surprised if people don't have a question about what just happened.
So you basically assignment at each position. So when you decremented, you said, look at the value in that place and go down.
Right, and then I subtracted 1. Yeah, so numbers is a number. It started up here, and I'm just decreasing my number, and then pulling the value of the array out at each position there. But does anybody notice anything funky that I did? How does it know to exit the while loop?
You put a condition.
What?
There was no like condition of num equals 0 or a 0 is falsy.
0 is falsy. Yeah. A little bit of a trick going on there. Since 0 is falsy, it knows to exit out when while 0 is going to be false. However, there is a little bit of a bug because if you see it also printed out undefined, so it went one more time, then it should have gone through that loop.
Minus before the would not have printed orange.
It would have printed orange, but not undefined, I think. It went through one too many times, actually. So nope, it didn't print orange, see? So the undefined wasn't from that. It was a result of finishing the while loop, I guess. So you're right, yeah, it didn't print orange. Because it got to 0 before it ran through that step in the loop. Yep. All right, so let's see. We'll probably, I think we're gonna take a break doing this stuff now, and I'm going to step over to a different topic. And this one, I am gonna have you guys do a little bit of hands-on work as well. But I wanna start introducing the idea of a package manager, and what is a package manager, and what does it mean to use a package manager. So we've been writing almost all of our code out ourselves, bit by bit, for what we've done so far, right? We're used to writing everything ourselves. We're not used to relying on other libraries or other code. But I've talked about in class, the most useful thing you can do as a programmer is leverage other people's code instead of rewriting everything yourself, right? I mean, we can't write the millions of lines of code that we need to build an operating system. We're running on top of somebody else's operating system. We're running on top of a language somebody else wrote. Everything is leveraging work that other people did. Well, you can do the exact same thing inside of your language and get a lot of capabilities that you don't have to write by hand yourself. And the way you do that in most modern languages is use what's known as a package manager to bring in code that's been prepackaged by somebody else to use. The most popular package manager for working with JavaScript code is NPM. A lot of people think that it stands for Node Package Manager, and you can think of it that way, but really it doesn't. It just stands for NPM. It's a little weird and convoluted. And it's a way to manage packages and pull things into your project and use them. So this is going to be a little different than just straight hands-on at first, but if everyone's in their Cloud9 environment, and you created a node environment, as I suggested that you did in the last class, you should have in the root of your workspace a package.json file. And this file is part of working in Node. This isn't directly tied to NPM. It's not a result of NPM, it's more a result of Node, but NPM leverages it to manage your packages. So there's some information in this package.json file. Some of it's about what is your app or what's going on here, like your name and version and description. We're sort of going to just skip over all that for the time being. And instead, we're going to look at this dependencies section. So what we see here in dependencies is a list of 4 different items that it's got listed. Async and express, and this is the new one. This one won't be in yours probably. And then socket.io, right? These are the packages that you're pulling in and working with in this project. So remember, starting up the running Node server.js in class last time, and then you were able to go in there and see this server running. Well, if we step over into this server.js file for a second, and we don't have to look through the whole thing because there's a lot going on, you'll see at the top here we've got some requires. And some of those include require async and require socket.io and require express, right? We go back to our package JSON, async, express, socket.io. So we're starting to see a connection here between these two. This file is able to pull in some other code using this require statement, and then use that code as a result of them having been installed or downloaded with our package manager. And we're not going to go over every bit of it, but we can even, you know, look through the code and try and find, like, where is, oops, I don't know how to use my Mac. Where is Express being used? Okay, Express is here, and then here's like express.static. Okay, so there's some stuff going on there. I don't quite know what Express is though. So let's step over into here, and this is the npm.js site. So this is npmjs.com, and we can search for Express and see, oh, here's this Express package. It's a fast, unopinionated, minimalist web framework for Node. And then there's going to be some documentation here talking about some of the stuff, how to use Express, but it may link out to other documentation. Express is actually huge, so you're not going to be able to find all of the documentation just right here for what Express is, but some of the stats are quite interesting too. This thing's been downloaded 500,000 times in the last day and over 4 million times in the last week by different people. So this is really getting into the idea of reusing other people's code. Millions of code are being done by other projects because there are thousands of projects all leveraging this Express code so that they didn't have to write their own web framework code.
Those downloads.
What?
Those downloads are really tricky, right? Because it doesn't mean that 4 million people download it. It just means how many times they have downloaded the package. So yeah.
That's why I said only thousands, because I don't think there's not millions of projects using Express.
So you can have 2 projects and those 2 times download Express and that counts. Right?
Well, yeah, and also you're frequently, a lot of times, like on a build server or something for code, you'll re-download your dependencies every time or quite frequently. And so, you know, one project may download, depending on how somebody has something set up, it may download those dependencies a dozen times, 2 dozen times, 100 times in a week. So it can vary a lot, or you may do it once. It'll vary a lot. So it's not a number telling you how many people are using it, but it does give you some sort of usage indication. And we'll get to see that in just a minute. So Express is a huge example. So let's click through real fast to the website and documentation for it. And you can begin to see, like, let's look at the, I don't know, the API documentation. This is huge. There's tons and tons of code in Express that other people didn't have to write, and they were able to leverage without having to write each line of code. And that's sort of where the value of a package manager begins to come in, is instead of having to write everything from scratch, you can leverage somebody else's packages. So what I wanted us to do is let's have a very small, simple package for us to pull down and work with as our first one. And that's why I went with this. Let me make sure I get the name of it right that I'm using, this prompt sync. So if you want to, you don't have to use npm.js to find this, but I find it useful. You can search for prompt sync and then click on this prompt sync link just to get more information about this package that we're going to be using. And this is one that would have been really nice in our last class. And maybe I'll even give you guys some small assignments with this so that you can finally have an interactive app outside of a browser window, getting input from the user. But prompt sync, this is where you go and get information about it as npm.js. You begin to learn, like, is this what I want to use? Is this a module or a package that's going to give me something useful? So what is it? It's a sync prompt for a node. Well, this may not make sense to people who haven't done a lot of console programming or something like that, but you can start looking at information about it. This thing's been downloaded 1,500 times in the last day and 9,000 times in the last week. And then it'll probably give you, it even gives you, here's how to like import it or require it. And then here's how to use it. And this comment really tells us what's going on. This prompt sync package is going to allow us to get input from the user. So now we're going to be able to write programs, in a sense, with this that can get user input and work with that user input in some way. So I'll probably give you a small programming assignment around this, just so you guys can start writing like an interactive program and feel fun with that. But how do we get this down into our code, right? What's the process for installing this or working with it? And that's where you can go up and read more about working with NPM, but the way that it works in general, you got to get out of Node here and into your command prompt. NPM is a command line tool to install packages. And what you would want to do is, while you're inside of your workspace, your folder here, you'll run npm install, and then that package name from the npm JS site. So this package name is prompt-sync. But then there's one other useful parameter you probably want to put on, and that's this --save. And all that's doing when you do --save is adding it to this package.json file so that it's going to be in your history here and you'll be able to see that it's installed. And if you do an npm install without parameters in a folder, it'll install everything from your package.json dependencies automatically. So if you did it without --save, then this line wouldn't be added to your package.json file, right? It would install the package, but you wouldn't have this line here, so you wouldn't be able to easily reinstall it on that project. Yeah. So an example would be, let me try and think. Can I think of a really small package out there? Yes, I can. npm install leftpad. So now I just installed another tiny little package. And I'll show you that it was installed in just a minute. But what you can see is the package.json file doesn't have it listed. So it's not easy to know that that package is installed. And if you wanted to reinstall all the packages that you're depending on for this project or this code, you wouldn't know to reinstall that leftpad, or npm wouldn't know to reinstall it automatically if we did an install. But you can, and this is where they get installed by default, is there. You've got this node modules folder now right here. So if we open up node modules, you'll see a ton of packages here. And you're going, whoa, I didn't install all of those. What's going on? That's because packages can have other dependencies as well on other packages. And when you install it, you don't just install the one package, but you install any of its dependencies. And on and on and on down the chain. So let's go into Express, which we do know is installed, just to get a feel for this. And let's look at its package.json file real fast. And if we get rid of the stuff that isn't really relevant to us and scroll down a little bit, you'll be able to see, where are my dependencies? There should be some here. Maybe it doesn't have any. Maybe, oh, there we go. Here's our dependencies. Here are the packages that Express depends on. So now if we, there we're using that code. So now if we look over here real fast, right, and we say, oh, express depends on commander. Oh, yep. That's why we have this commander over here, and connect. There's connect. And sure enough, just about everything, will be installed there that this depended on as well, and on down. Like these packages might have dependencies on something else. And so when you install something, you install not just that one package but it'll install any dependencies it has, which will install any dependencies they have, etc. And there's potential for some conflicts and other things around that, which we don't really need to get into immediately. We can talk about in the future if you guys encounter that. But there's ways to resolve the issue if, say, Express says, oh, I depend on Commander 0.6.1, and then instead the prompt sync says, I depend on Commander 0.5.2. There's NPM has ways to resolve that and to have each one use just the code that they need. But ultimately what it's doing is pulling down any of these dependencies that you have for any package that you have in here. So we looked at Express. Well, sure, what about LeftPad that I just installed, but we didn't actually add to our package.json? Sure enough, there it is. Here's that LeftPad package in our node modules folder. And you can see LeftPad doesn't have any dependencies. There is this dev dependencies section, not something you need to worry about just yet, but we will talk about it over time. Those are dependencies only on your development system while you're working with it, or only if you're building that project. They're not dependencies when you deploy it and somebody else pulls in that module. So we wouldn't install the dev dependencies for LeftPad because we're not building the LeftPad project. But if instead we were creating it and we did an install, then we would pull those down as well. So this is, there's a lot going on here. Any questions about it so far? In terms of being able to pull down other people's code, I really recommend, I think it would be great for you to go over to NPM. They've got some documentation, but as I said, a lot of the documentation is geared towards creating your own packages and not necessarily working with them as much. There's a little bit of that. Installing NPM packages locally is a good example of some documentation about how to work with some of this. But there's a lot of great information on here, but even just beyond that, I would suggest just to get a feel for how big this environment is and how much exists, go to NPM and just search for packages of different types, right? Like, let's say in last class we talked about Caesar's cipher, right? Being able to rotate. So let's probably spelled Caesar wrong. Does anybody know how to spell Caesar? So here we go. Here's a package, encrypts text using a Caesar cipher. So we can write our own, and I think it's really useful to learn how to write your own stuff. But look at that, somebody else has already created a little package. So if you wanted to do some Caesar ciphers in your code, you could just go pull down this package and leverage it.
Hey, Jared.
Yeah.
So in your experience, I'm thinking that there's probably a lot of redundancy here, and there's a lot of people who write very similar packages. What do you use for your best practices to choose, what's the most popular or what's the most appropriate given project for yourself?
Yeah, I've got a lot of different tools and processes I use for that. That's part of the reason, one of the reasons I was pointing out the downloads and the usage stats was it's one, there's a lot of metrics to be used, and he's right, there's so many packages up there. There's no restriction to being able to upload a package other than it can have the same name as another one. So there are millions of packages that people have uploaded to NPM. So how do you find quality ones, good ones, or ones that are going to work or be maintained, or ones that a lot of other people are using? So you might go, if you find a package, you might search Google and see how many other people are using it or referencing it. You might talk a lot about GitHub in general, but you might go to GitHub and look at things like how many issues exist or have been closed on the package, right? Like this says, oh, we've had 11 closed, there's 3 open. This is pretty small. So let's go look for something else. Let's not search this repository. Let's find another example of a very active one. Perhaps the biggest, most popular project on GitHub, Bootstrap by Twitter. They've closed 15,000 issues in their issue tracker. They've got 257 open. They've got 100,000 stars. So a lot of people are using this project. You know, it's very active. They're closing stuff very actively. So those are the types of things I tend to look at to try and figure out, like, do I want to use this package?
So would that have been a good one if you had 15,000 issues out of 116,000? Is that a good?
I mean, the fact that they've closed 15,000 probably means it's pretty active, because that's insane. That's just an insane level of activity. And there's other tools you can use to compare level of activity, but it's useful to get a gauge for how stable something is, how much it's being updated and worked with and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, you also want to go just look and see, does it meet my needs? Because sometimes a lesser known package can be exactly what you need, and doing exactly what you need it to do. Right, like this prompt sync isn't the most popular package out here on GitHub. It's only got 55 stars, a few things. But what I found valuable was it's much, much easier. And we're going to write a tiny bit of code in just a moment. Much easier to work with in a simple Node.js file than almost all of the other examples, because all of the other really popular prompting tools require callbacks, which are not as easy to work with. They're not very intuitive. And this one is much more intuitive and easier to work with. So that's why I pulled it down and figured we could leverage it. But yeah, when you're making those decisions on a team or for a larger project, there's a lot of sort of investigation you want to do to say, how much is this used? Can I expect that this is going to keep getting updated? You sort of want to look into the package a little bit, especially for the top level ones that you're pulling. Like Express would be another good example, right? Express has, I don't even know, right? Express is the most popular JavaScript or Node web engine. They're like 34,000 likes, and you saw there were millions of downloads a week. It's had tons of issues, and they're working through them very actively. You can also look at things like this pulse graph or other graphs here that'll give you an idea in GitHub of just how often people are working on a project, how active it is. Like here you can see there's been a lot less activity on this than there was back here. But there's still a good amount relative to a lot of other projects, a lot of commits going on.
Sometimes it doesn't mean that it's just getting unpopular. Sometimes it means they're more stable.
Yep. It could mean it's more stable too. Yeah, there's a lot to try and parse through to decide something like that. Do you have different processes you would use?
I haven't really used NPM so much. I was just curious. I'm more like straight up open source kind of libraries and packages and stuff like that. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead and use this prompt. We pulled down. Did people pull down the prompt sync and use the save on their installed in theirs? All right. Well, let me show you how to do that again, or give you that command line. So you should basically run this command line, so that it's going to go ahead and be installed on your system. And then once you have it installed, create a prompt.js file in your root of your folder right here, because we're gonna put some code in there and use this prompt sync package All right, do people have a prompt.js file ready to go? So there is one quirk about this prompt sync package compared to a lot of other ones.
So mine didn't save as a JS file, mine saved under.
Just hold it. It's fine.
There is one little quirk about the way that you require prompt sync. So the way you require packages, or the traditional way to require packages in a Node project, is to use require and then the name of the package. And so that's how we require prompt sync here. I'll show you another syntax probably in a later class that you'll encounter in a lot of React apps that comes from ES6. Because ES6 finally, for the first time in JavaScript's history, added a module capability into the language itself. And so people are slowly transitioning to using that syntax, but you're going to encounter this more often than not in a lot of your packages, is this require syntax for importing a module. The one thing that's a little different than most of the other ones, like if we went back to our server.js here and we looked at these requires, you'll notice that this just was require and then the name inside of the parentheses. Whereas in this, the prompt sync requires us to call it as a function after we require it. It's a little quirky. I'm not quite sure why it's that way, but the only reason I know that is because I just read their documentation. It said, oh, here's how I import this guy. I do this and then I call it as a function at that point. And we'll store that in a prompt variable, right? And now what we're able to do with this is now we can call prompt, which is storing just a function for us, and give it a string that we want to prompt the user with, and assign the result of what the user puts in to a value right off of that prompt. So this is probably the simplest type of program you could write with this, or about as simple as you can get. But now we've got a program, something that we never even actually wrote in our last class for the most part, that lets us get user input and output that back to the screen or work with it in some way. So when you get this, what's that? Yeah, I created prompt.js, yeah. So once you have this file pretty much copied down, just, let me know, put your hand up real fast. All right. Starting to get there. And then we'll, once most people have it, we'll run through, we'll let the code run. And then I'll give you a slightly more complex application that you could write using this prompt that will sort of throw back to some of the stuff we did in our last class as well. All right, who's still working on it? Nobody? We've all got it in now? Okay, so the way that you run it is the same way we ran server.js. You do node and then the name of the file, so just prompt. Right? Know if you need the .js. And then it'll execute your program. So in this case, then you can put in a number and it'll spit that back out. So if everyone can run it and just make sure that their simple prompt program is working. put your hand up if you need help or if you have a problem with it.
So can you do, like when you did Node prompt in Node.js, can you do that with any of your files?
What do you mean?
Because in the past, you had to do it literally, you had to type out prompt j.js.
Oh, I don't know. That was just me being lazy.
You know,
I was guessing that it would look for a .js file. It probably actually doesn't. It probably first looks for like a .sh file and then a .js file or something. And it's complex how the system behaves. But I've told you many times, a good programmer is a lazy programmer. I don't want to type .js if I don't have to. Ugh. Way too lazy for that. So are people able to get it working? Anybody have any problems? Problems?
Yeah.
All right. Let's see if we can take a look at this.
Oh, because you have strings, how you have to have backticks to use the ES6.
All right, we'll try .js. Did you add .js? Did it make a difference? Well, like I said, I don't know if it'll do it or not.
Before the backtick,
Try it. Okay.
it's not like a string. Then
Oh,
and
yeah.
then
It needs to be a capital. Yeah, you can use the same case. So where?
So I did the same thing.
You got
So that-
.js. And then you ran it.
Which is called backtick.
Yeah, what happened there? Hold on. Let's see.
oh, we can-
Okay.
oh, still there.
I thought you said the things. Oh, okay.
Yes.
What's your file?
In that last statement.
Where is it?
It's like,
Oh, you always
I think you
saved
created your file inside it.
Yeah, what experiences?
Yeah.
Sure.
Close that. So you have it inside there. So this is like open there.
Oh.
That.
You're just creating this.
Oh, it's open this. Yeah.
So if any was favored in there silently, I wish it would. And then that's when okay. I don't think we're actually there yet. This is trying to do a number.
yeah.
Still won't quite work.
This is good.
It's because you were using single quotes. These are the cap tick quotes is what you need. You need to use the little back tick so that it'll interpolate this value, right? So you need to change that so that these are
Did you create?
this guy. If you remember that from the
Last
class,
class, he wasn't here last class.
that's sort of the way to variables in
College applications.
string.
Oh, okay.
So I might be-
Yeah, you need to run on your.
Oh, no, that's fine.
I just said it real quick.
Yeah. So now let's see if it works. Sweet. All right. Anybody still having problems with it?
I'm trying to find a backtick character on a Mac keyboard here. Although he's got a,
It should be right under your escape key if it's the same as mine. Should be on the same key as your tilde. Uh-oh, he's got a different language, doesn't he?
yeah,
Exactly. I'm gonna be
I'll
lost.
show you.
It's a different language keyboard.
oh, they're good.
There you go. That's the right thing.
Oh.
The IDE tries to be smart. It sees you insert one and it thinks, oh, you're trying to make a quoted string. Let me put two in.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
I can get it. It's on the lower. It's there. Yeah. Sorry, he wasn't here last time, so he didn't know he had to have his own.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Should-
So we're getting him set up and running. Well, I'm gonna you can keep working with him. I'm gonna just sort of wrap up because we're at 12, but I do want to say, so now that we can prompt people, we've never been able to do this before, right? So let's go revisit. One of the things I would like for you guys to do as sort of a homework assignment is revisit one of the programs that we wrote in our last class. Do people remember when we wrote a program that randomly got an integer from 1 to 100, and then you tried, like the program tried to guess the value of it, in a sense?
Vaguely.
So I'll probably give you some of the structure around this, but let's try and recreate that, except now you can actually prompt the user and give them some guidance for what to do if their number is not the correct number. And I think I can put this up in REPL.it as something that you guys can work through. So I'll check and see if I can create that as a little assignment thing. But basically what we'll do is we'll have a little program that will, and I may even be able to give you the background of a random number from int or whatever, and then have the user try and guess what the number is and give them tips like, oh, you guessed too low, you guessed too high, number correct. Like, all right. And the next class we'll probably do a little bit more JavaScript background, but really want to dive into HTML and maybe even CSS a little bit as well, so that we can have these underpinnings for our React work.